The cafe was half empty, sunlight filtering through the large glass windows and pooling golden warmth on the marble floor. Emily clutched her coffee cup, her fingers trembling slightly as she scanned the tables. Her lunch break was nearly over, and all the seats were taken, except one. A man in a dark suit sat alone by the window, tapping on his tablet, his posture commanding without being arrogant. His wristwatch alone probably cost more than her monthly rent. She hesitated, then gathered her courage. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Can I sit here?" The man looked up, eyes sharp but not unkind. After a pause, a slow smile touched his lips. "Only if you eat too," he said. Emily blinked. I only have coffee." "Then you'll have lunch with me," he said, already waving for the waiter. She almost refused, but something in his tone, gentle yet certain, made her stay. She didn't know it yet, but this simple lunch would change everything. Across from her sat Alexander Hart, the billionaire CEO of Hart Tech Industries, his face too familiar from news articles she'd scrolled past while making dinner for her son. He was used to people wanting something from him, but this woman seemed different. She looked tired, yes, but also strong, her eyes guarded yet kind. "You work nearby?" he asked, sipping his espresso. Emily nodded. "Receptionist. At the insurance office next door." He studied her for a moment. "And a single mom, I'm guessing." Her fork froze midair. "How did you?" "The photo in your wallet," he said gently, nodding to the small picture peeking from her purse. "Cute kid." Her defenses melted a little. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not pitied, not judged, but simply noticed. By dessert, they were laughing, something Emily hadn't done freely in months. Alexander found himself oddly captivated by her honesty. No rehearsed charm, no polished small talk. Just truth. "So," he said, leaning back, "what would you do if money wasn't a problem?" She smiled wistfully. "Open a children's bookstore. Somewhere small, cozy, with a reading corner." He nodded slowly. "Sounds perfect." Later that night, as he reviewed contracts in his office, her voice lingered in his mind. He was surrounded by luxury, yet something about her simplicity stirred him deeply, like a reminder of the world outside his glass towers. Days passed, but fate wasn't done. When Emily received an unexpected call from Hart Tech's HR offering her an interview for a new assistant role, she almost thought it was a mistake. When she walked into the executive office and saw Alexander again, smiling faintly, she realized it wasn't. "You said you wanted a chance," he told her. "Consider this one." Her heart raced. "Why me?" He leaned forward, eyes sincere. "Because you reminded me what it means to work for something real." And just like that, the woman who'd once only asked for a seat was about to find herself at a table where her life could truly begin again. The cafe smelled of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries, the kind of comforting scent that almost made you forget about bills and deadlines. Emily stepped inside, shaking off the drizzle from her old gray coat. Her lunch break was short, and all she wanted was a quiet place to sit before returning to her desk job at the insurance office next door. But the cafe was busier than usual, every table filled with laughing coworkers, couples sharing desserts, and students typing furiously on laptops. She clutched her paper cup a little tighter, scanning the room until her gaze landed on a table by the window. Only one man sat there. He looked different, not in the loud, attention-seeking way of those who wanted to be noticed, but in the quiet confidence of someone who was used to being obeyed. A tailored navy suit, an elegant watch that caught the light, a calm posture as he read something on his tablet. He didn't seem like the kind of man who'd welcome interruptions. Emily hesitated. Her stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten since early morning, but asking to sit there felt absurd. Still, her legs moved before her thoughts caught up. She approached slowly, her heart tapping nervously against her ribs. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft, almost lost in the hum of chatter. "Can I sit here? Everywhere else is full." The man looked up. His eyes were an unreadable shade of gray-blue, sharp, intelligent, but not cold. He studied her for a moment that felt much too long. She noticed the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that came from years of thinking too much and smiling too little. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. "Only if you eat too," he said. Emily blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. "Oh, no. I just..." She lifted her coffee cup awkwardly. I'm fine, really. Then you'll have lunch with me, he said simply, turning to signal the waiter before she could protest. Her first instinct was to refuse. People like him didn't invite people like her. But something in his tone wasn't commanding, it was kind, steady, and for some reason, she sat down. She didn't know his name, and he didn't ask hers. But as sunlight fell across the table, Emily had the odd feeling that something was beginning, something that had nothing to do with coincidence. Emily wasn't sure what to do with her hands. They kept fidgeting with the edge of her napkin as she tried not to notice how gracefully the man across from her moved. Even the way he lifted his cup of espresso seemed practiced, controlled, deliberate. She had never sat this close to someone who radiated quiet authority. The gold initials on his cufflinks glimmered faintly, AH. He noticed her glance. Alexander Hart, he said, extending a hand. And you are. She hesitated before taking it. His handshake was firm but warm. Emily Carter. Nice to meet you, Emily Carter, he said, as though tasting the syllables. You work nearby, she nodded, forcing a polite smile. Receptionist at the insurance office next door. Nothing glamorous. There's honesty in that, he said with a faint smirk. That's rare. She didn't know how to respond, so she busied herself with the menu. Her palms were clammy. What was she even doing here, sharing a table with a billionaire? Because that's what he was. She recognized him now. Alexander Hart, CEO of Hart Tech Industries. She had seen his face in magazines at the grocery store checkout, always labeled, most eligible bachelor, or, self-made visionary. And now he was watching her as if she were the only person in the cafe. You've got that look, he said suddenly. What look? She asked, startled. The one people wear when they're used to taking care of everyone else. Her breath caught. That's oddly specific. He gestured toward her purse, where a small, worn photograph peeked out. Your son. Emily flushed, instinctively pushing it back inside. Yes, Ethan. He's 6. Alexander's voice softened. He's lucky to have you. She wasn't sure if she should thank him or change the subject. Compliments weren't something she heard often, not the sincere kind, at least. It's not easy, she admitted. But he makes it worth it. I know what it's like, he said quietly, almost to himself. To build something from nothing. To keep pushing when no one believes you can. Their eyes met for a moment too long. Emily looked away first, but not before noticing something in his expression, a flicker of loneliness, hidden beneath all that power. For the first time since she sat down, she didn't feel out of place. She felt understood. By the time dessert arrived, Emily realized she hadn't thought about her to-do list, her overdue bills, or the endless laundry waiting at home. For once, the world outside the cafe seemed to pause. Alexander Hart, the billionaire she'd only ever read about in magazines, was sitting across from her, laughing at something she had said about her failed attempt at baking a cake for her son. His laughter was genuine, not the polite chuckle of someone indulging a stranger. You really shouldn't attempt chocolate souffle without following a recipe, he teased, grinning, his gray-blue eyes sparkling in the afternoon light. It's dangerous. I've seen the aftermath in kitchens far worse than yours. Emily rolled her eyes, a smile tugging at her lips. I didn't burn down the apartment this time. Progress. He leaned back, observing her with quiet amusement. You're honest in a way most people aren't. It's refreshing. She looked down at her plate, suddenly feeling self-conscious. I've had to be. Life doesn't give you chances if you're polite and quiet. I know, he said softly, his tone heavier now. You fight for the little things, the things that matter. That takes courage. They fell into a comfortable silence, interrupted only by the gentle clinking of cutlery and the soft hum of conversation around them. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel awkward, it felt like understanding. Then, with a mischievous glint, he asked, Tell me, Emily, if money weren't an obstacle, what would you do? She paused, her fork hovering over her dessert. Most people wouldn't ask such questions, not billionaires, certainly. But Alexander wasn't most people. She drew in a slow breath, letting her imagination run free for the first time in years. I'd open a children's bookstore, she said, finally. Small, cozy, with a reading corner for kids and parents to sit together, and maybe a tiny cafe tucked in the back. Somewhere that feels like home. Alexander nodded thoughtfully, leaning back in his chair. That sounds perfect. I'd visit it. Emily laughed lightly. You'd fit right in, I suppose. You already have the CEO energy. It's hard to imagine you reading picture books without a boardroom nearby. He chuckled. Maybe. Or maybe it's the simplicity of it that appeals to me. I'm surrounded by contracts, meetings, and numbers every day. I forget what it feels like to want something purely, without pressure or expectation. Emily caught herself staring at him, realizing she was seeing him differently, not as a headline, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a person. A man capable of desire, of dreams, and of noticing the world as it truly is. And in that moment, she understood that this encounter, this unexpected, strange, and improbable lunch, was about more than coincidence. It was a beginning. The call came on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of day that made Emily wish she could stay in bed with a book and a cup of coffee rather than face the humdrum of her office. She picked up the phone, expecting another reminder about an overdue bill or a telemarketing pitch. Instead, a polite, professional voice said, "This is HeartTech Industries. We'd like to offer you an interview for an assistant position." Emily froze, the phone slipping slightly in her hand. I'm sorry." The voice repeated the invitation, calm, precise. She glanced around her cramped apartment, at the laundry waiting in the corner, at the stack of bills she'd been trying to ignore. Could this be real? Her mind raced with questions. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? Later, walking into the sleek lobby of HeartTech, her nerves tightened into a familiar knot. Everything smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume, the kind of place she'd only seen on TV. And then she saw him, Alexander Hart, standing by the reception desk, as composed and powerful as she remembered. "Emily," he said, his voice low, carrying that same calm certainty from their cafe encounter. "I'm glad you came." Her heart thumped in her chest. "I'm here. Thank you for the opportunity." "Opportunity," he echoed with a faint smile. "No, Emily, this is more than that." He led her down a glass corridor, the light catching on the steel and mirrors, making her feel both small and strangely important. "I want someone I can trust. Someone grounded. Someone who reminds me what it's like to care about more than just numbers." Emily blinked, caught off guard. "Me, yes," he said simply. "You reminded me what it means to work for something real. Not for power, or profit, or reputation. Just for something that matters." Her stomach fluttered in a mix of disbelief and excitement. This was no ordinary job offer. This was a lifeline, a chance to step into a world she'd only glimpsed from the outside. She walked into the interview room, her hands trembling slightly, but her heart lighter than it had been in years. Alexander watched from across the room, a faint smile on his lips. There was no pretense, no pressure, only the quiet understanding that sometimes, the simplest gestures could change a life. For Emily Carter, the woman who had once only asked for a seat in a crowded cafe, this was more than just a table. It was a new beginning, a chance to build a life where she and her son could finally breathe, laugh, and dream again. And as the door closed behind her, she realized that some lunches were more than meals, they were the start of something extraordinary.